Normandy. It was just one great harbour full of British, American, Australian warships, destroyers, and they were firing their guns. And because it was days later when we left Weymouth, we had to wait for the tide or whatever it was, and finally we went in, our craft went in, and the beach had been taken pretty much by then. We went up on the top and all hell broke loose up there, and each consignment of troops had to go to different points, and mine was Point Charlie. It's still there today. It says Point Charlie, and that's where we were. And there was literally a lot of German prisoners of war coming past us, going down on the beach to get back in these empty ships that brought us in. And I'm talking a lot of German prisoners. Some of them were wounded, and they got, in all fairness, they got full attention from the British medics, from the Americans and the Canadians. It was good because, see, we were close. Omaha Beach, the British were right next to us, so we kind of intermingled a little bit, not much, but a little bit with them. And as a matter of fact, some of their officers were on Omaha. Yeah. Anyway, we got up on top there, and I can't pronounce the French name. Inglesi something or other it was called. And it was a small village. And we went off in this one big field, and we were taking the drivers had to open the bonnet of the craft like a half track. Had to lift that up, and there was all kinds of things in there because in case you got wet, they had to take all these things off the exhaust and that kind of thing. So they did that, and also that was towards late afternoon, as I remember, and then towards evening, dark, we heard gas. So we ran for our gas masks, and Trixie had mine, that bugger, and his was there, his gas mask, in a container. He used to have this fabric, like you have with the belts, I forget the name of it, canvas. And he had his chewing tobacco in in his gas mask, chewing tobacco and fags, and he used to love beech nut chewing tobacco, and he had my gas mask on. So I was talking to him, and he was going like this. I said, what's going on? There. So I went over and picked it up, and about that time we realized that we weren't being gassed. Gas is what? Petrol. So the 2.5-ton truck was coming around unloading petrol for the half-tracks and the jeeps, and there was a lot of them. And they were shouting, and anybody want gas? But they were just saying gas, gas, and that's what we thought. So when Trix took off that gas mask, I said, well, I can't say it because of the camera, but I had a piece of him, by golly, I crawled up one side and down the other. And he said, well, you had mine right there. I said, look at it. I said, it's full of beech nut chewing tobacco and chewing gum and all that, and candy. Well, he said, you took some of it, didn't you? I said, I did, yeah. He said, don't complain. So I said, all right then. After the vehicles were looked at in terms of the waterproofing that they had on them, then we had the word move out. Now that means, when you hear the word move out, it means you got to get your rifle, you're going in to take care of the Germans. The hedgerow fighting was nasty. There was all kind of small arms fire, and they had their small rockets that they used, and machine guns. They had the mortars. That's what got me in the leg, was a little bit of mortar about the size of my little finger. I was bleeding, and of course I was picking up the wrong message, but I fixed it up myself. I didn't want to go to a station because there were boys there without arms and God knows what, and mine was just a very small wound. The situation was our real introduction to combat, to war in every sense of the word. And we have to keep in mind, when we're talking about this, that the Germans were trained, years of experience in this kind of thing. They were fighting for what they believed was their country, and they were quite used to all the tricks that, I call them anyway, that you use in warfare to get advantage and moving forward. They had all of this, but what they didn't know, and they should have, the British boys are now left, they had gone through hell with Dunkirk and all these things, which I remember when I was a young man about Dunkirk. They had gone through all of that, so they knew a lot about warfare. And of course, what they didn't realize about the Yanks, that we are one determined country. And we take the Stars and Stripes at heart, which we did. And this is what I said to myself when I was in that kind of mess, that this is democracy, this is where we're going. And it wasn't too long after that I got a piece in the knee which slowed me up, so it didn't bother me that much, to be honest with you. And we just could not move. They had one of their panzer divisions at Omaha, which we didn't know about. Of course, the British boys also had a panzer division up there too, and I got this from a source, and I don't want to mention it here, that the British boys, these two divisions were there for practice. One didn't have ammunition and one did. And the ones that did were at Omaha. That's why we couldn't move. That doesn't mean to say the British boys didn't run into a bunch of stuff. They sure did, in spades. Good lads. And they were up trying to take Caen, I think, at that time. They were moving and we weren't. And I can show that on a map later on. So we had to figure a way of getting through these hedgerows. And what the American boys came up with was, in the front of their tank they put a wedge, a steel wedge. And that went into the hedgerow and opened it up. Then we were behind the tanks and we were moving forward. After we'd been in that situation for about 3 or 4 days where we couldn't move, and they were trying to use these tactics. We were told to lay down these high illuminating markers, which are about as wide as this room and twice as long. And lay them down, put your ammo box on there and get out of there and go back. And we went back about a mile, back to the beach. And without a word of a lie, and I've got it down in one of the books here, there were 3,000 aircraft. British boys were up there, the American, the Canadian, the Free French, the Polish boys, they were up there. And they were looking at these markers, these highly reflected markers. And they dropped thousands of tons of bombs. That's when we moved ahead and really gave an accountability for ourselves. And then the carnage of the bombing was unbelievable. I couldn't get over it. Not only human beings, but cattle, houses. It was total destruction. But it gave us a way forward. And this, in effect, blew up a lot of the German resistance with their tanks and what have you. That whole process was my, and a lot of other guys, thousands and thousands of combat. And we knew, as I said a while ago, we were fighting an experienced army. But with our determination, and with the help of the British boys and the Canadians, we were able to move forward. The 3rd Armoured Division were in 5 major campaigns throughout the war. And very briefly, it was Omaha Beach, the Felice Gap, northern France, Germany, and then the Battle of the Bulge. Also, I think it would be the thing to do to understand that these names, we didn't have them when we were going through what we were going through. These names came later to identify the kind of strategy and the efforts that the 3rd Armoured Division was making. And again, to put things in perspective, the Felice Gap came about in a most unusual way. We'd been on the beach and we were at a standstill, literally. And I've explained about these thousands of aircraft, British, Canadian, American, opening up a gap for us to move through. After we did that and got into St. Louis, and of course that was pretty much flattened, the fighting there was very intense, and when we were through with that, we then swung to our left to meet the British boys who were closing a gap at a place called Felice. In that gap, to my remembrance, to my knowledge, it was pretty much a slaughterhouse. The Germans were burning all their vehicles and trying to make edgeway to get through that little gap, which was not that wide, perhaps maybe a mile, mile and a half, I'm not quite sure now. And at the gap itself, that was indeed a challenge to both the Germans and to us and the British boys and the Canadians, because the fighting there was about as intense as I've seen it while I was in the service. The smell of death, burning vehicles, cattle, was unbelievable to look at. And keep in mind that we were just young fellas, we were 18, 19, experiencing this kind of thing. And I'm not sure how long it lasted, but I do know that we captured thousands and thousands of German troops who were readily putting up their hands towards the last and giving up, and then we got them back to the beaches so they could be put on vehicles, sea-bearing craft to come to this country and the United States, wherever they were taking these prisoners. We didn't know, as I said a while ago, it was called the Felice Gap, but that's a good name because the way it turned out, that's what happened. And of course, a lot got through that gap. Thousands got through it. And of course then our job was, after we closed it, was to chase these guys to see if we could capture some more of them. And that in and of itself took quite a few days to get caught up with them. And then of course they used to have these roadblocks, and that was something to contend with, because the Germans were quite skilled in war. And the Americans, we weren't, that's for sure, not modern war. And the British boys had been through some of it, they knew, and they were a big help. And the Americans and the British boys became quite buddies, as we say, over in America. And we did bump into them from time to time, heading up north through Holland and Belgium and places like that. And I don't remember the name of the places. If I did, I couldn't pronounce them, to be honest with you, because it didn't mean anything to us. We knew where we were. There was always something to be done. That's what we were there for. And on the personal side, as you know, I was in a turret with a 50 caliber machine gun, and I created a lot of damage, considerable, with that gun. And it used to get so hot that it would seize up on me, and then I used to reverse to my Tommy gun and submachine gun, and I had a sidearm 45, and of course we always had plenty of grenades strapped to our shoulder straps. And the roadblocks were hell, because they knew how to do this, and they had that 90 millimeter cannon, we called it, and the block itself was called a roadblock, but it wasn't necessarily on a road. They would camouflage their guns, and also they would have one or two tanks beside that big gun, and then they had a special anti-tank gun set up with the roadblock, and usually they would have probably, I'm guessing now, maybe a platoon or two platoons of German soldiers, which would be a platoon would be 4 squads of 48, from 48 men in a squad, in a platoon. And they knew what they were doing, and they would let you come on in to that block. They wouldn't give that away until you were close, and then all hell broke loose. And it took us a while to understand what the devil they were doing, and we did. And then of course it didn't make it any easier, but it made it a little safer for us, knowing what to expect. Their fire was accurate and deadly, and they knew what to do. Being in places like Poland and Czechoslovakia and Russia, all these places fighting, they knew exactly what they were doing. But I don't think that the average soldier took on board what the American-British, the Allied combination had. And the one thing that I can assure you, gentlemen, is we had it in spades, and that's determination. We had a personal feeling about this. Myself, I wasn't here when all that bombing took place, but they killed a lot of Welsh people, a lot of towns people there in Swansea, and some of them happened to be my friends. And I said when I did come home on that ship, I think it was called the Masunder or the Salveston, I'm not sure which now, but research can dig it up. I talked to my mother and my brothers, and my sisters and friends, and they were telling me what it was like. And that stayed with me all my life. And it made it a little easier, not much, in actually killing the enemy. And that process in and of itself stayed with me. I still have dreams, and I needed medical help when I got out of the service because of the things that came up in combat in the war situation, and only another combat soldier can really understand what the feeling is like. So the Felice Gap was in a sense, and excuse me because I have a short time memory and a speech situation that's developed now over the last 6 months, which does give me a little bit of problems in pronunciation. But the Felice Gap, again, to close that part, was an intense wartime experience in every sense of the word. And from there, we moved into places like Namur and Liège. Now, the only reason I remember those two places was the greetings that we got from the people. They were putting their arms around us and giving us flowers and some fruit and patting us on the back. And of course we were black as the ace of spades because we didn't have a bath or a shower for weeks and weeks and weeks. And we had all this grime and stuff on us, and how these pretty little gals were throwing their arms around us, I don't know. But they were quite happy. And of course the kids wanted to shake your hand. And we usually had candy and chewing gum for the kids. If not, we'd open up a 10-in-1 ration and get out the chocolate and stuff and give to the kids. And also we'd give them the cheese and the spam that was in those packages because they were hungry, by golly. We'd only stay there maybe for, I think it was hours in Liège and Namur. We stayed a little longer there because we were pretty much regrouping. And I think we were there for about 3 or 4 days. And I met a gentleman who had a castle just outside of the town. And he was a big fella, and I mean big in every way. He had a big heart, and he was a big guy, and we met his family, and then he took us around the gardens and out by the forest. He had a big piece of property. Now the castle wasn't one of these big castles like we got in this country. It was a small version of a castle. It was very, very old, and we went through it and had a look at it. And as I said, then he had acres of ground around, and he said, I'm going to show you something now which you're going to find difficult to believe. And he had two men with him with spades, and they dug up these guns. A lot of them were antique guns, and swords and sabers, and he also had gold dishes, money, gold money. He had this that he had buried because he didn't want the Germans to get hold of this stuff. And he shared this experience with us. So the last night, I think, he invited us, me and Trixie and the Greek and a couple of the other guys from my squad, up to have dinner with him. And they had killed a deer, which they weren't allowed to do during the war. So we had some venison, and we took stuff up too. We had a talk with the cook, and he gave us a bunch of stuff, and we took up there. And we had a lovely party with this gentleman, and I had his picture, just a small one. His name and the address was on it, and over the last 70 years it's gone. I can't find it now. I would like to find it because I'd go there, by golly, and have a chat with that fella and his wife, and he had some late teenage boys, and it was a situation that we appreciated, to talk to some of the people that we had liberated. So we had Omaha, we had the Felice Gap, and then we talk about northern France. And getting up there, we went through these two towns I was telling you about. And there were some others, and I can't remember the name of them. I do remember, though, some of the heavy fighting as we got up there in France, up in northern France, because we were getting close to the German Siegfried Line. That gentleman was a strong opposition for tanks. You couldn't get tanks through there because of the way they had built the line, with all these concrete pillars going up, which were about that high, 3 feet, something like that. And they were thick, and they had to be blown up. And I personally wasn't in the blow-up of the Siegfried Line. I was back here lending support in the rear, and I remember the guys blowing those doggone things up. And then, of course, the engineers had to go through and make sure that the minefields on the other side, and of course there were minefields in the front of it. So being combat engineers, that was our job, to take a look at that and blow them up, and or blow at least a pathway through the mines, even to get at the teeth, the dragon teeth we called them. And that was again, that was quite nasty. Lost a lot of my buddies there, and we moved into Aachen. That then was the first German civilians that we encountered. And they were very scared of us because they heard that the Americans would shoot them and hang them and etc. But when they found out that we weren't that kind of way, they got to like us. In taking that particular place, I do remember going into some buildings, being very watchful, of course, because there were German soldiers in those buildings, and busting into some of those rooms and offices. There were suicides at the desks. And one I remember was a man, his wife, and I think there was some children there. Yes, there was. And that was a sight to behold, seeing that, because in reality that was a useless thing. But they had gotten the word that we were not very nice soldiers. And that was German propaganda, I think, more than anything. And of course there were bridges there that we had to work on, and some of the dynamite charges underneath hadn't gone off, so we had to get under there and take those things out. And we kind of held the line there at Aachen. We were getting ready for Christmas, holding the line. And we had our little things to make it look like Christmas. Before we talk about Christmas, I'd like to talk about the liberation of two prisoner death camps that were liberated by us. One at Sangerhausen and the other one, I believe, was at Nordhausen. That experience was a terrible thing for us young men to go through. The people, the prisoners, were skeletons in every sense of the word, walking skeletons. And they were dying literally as they were talking to us. These camps were held by the German SS, who were very nasty people. And of course we had an opportunity to get at these SS guys, and when we saw what we saw, we wasn't very gentle with them. That's for doggone sure. And we were instructed by our officers not to feed or give them anything to drink, because we might kill them. Because the medical people that was right behind us, they were there in droves to help all these poor prisoners that were literally dying. Quite a number were saved, that I heard later. That memory of those two camps and those people has stayed with me all my life, and I have nasty dreams about it. It was absolutely, undescribably terrible. I can't dig down and get the words to describe the way it was. And much of it, of course, was these people were in prison because of their religion. Jewish people. Of course, there were other types in there. And, I mean, a lot of us, we don't like this or that, but we certainly wouldn't kill them in their thousands, or hundreds of thousands. Apparently, there's over 5 million Jewish folks that got killed in this kind of way. Women, children, God knows what. And it was such a terrible experience that, as I said a minute ago, you never forget those kind of things. Anyway, let's move on now to Christmas. No, that was Christmas of 44, I think, yes. Yes. We were all in the line at Aachen. We could see the Germans way, way over yonder. They, I think, were preparing for Christmas. There was very little fire going on. Occasionally there'd be artillery, but that in and of itself was pretty nasty at times. But it wasn't as fierce because Christmas was near. And then one night, it must have been 11, 12 o'clock, we were told, pack up, move out. And the word they added on that was quick, which we did. It was snowing, and it was cold, bitterly cold, and some of us were half asleep, and we took off then within the hour pretty much, because we had to get the tanks warmed up and the half-tracks warmed up to get moving. And we were moving down then to what is commonly known today as the Battle of the Bulge. We didn't realize then what it was all about, but we did hear that the Germans had broken through the American Infantry Division, which was fairly new apparently from the United States, and they broke through and were heading towards Belgium. Fighting started almost immediately when we got close to the Bulge, as they call it. But it was very intense because the Germans wanted to break through, and then they would have gone into Belgium and the seaports there, and of course we probably might have lost the war, I don't know. But there was the 3rd Armored Division, and then on the other side was Patton with his US 3rd Army. Of course we were 1st Army, and we had to close that particular area to stop the Germans coming on through. And what they were looking for, and I mean really looking for, was gasoline, because their tanks were running out of gasoline. So word got to us, burn the gasoline. So we burned our gasoline supplies so they couldn't get any. Eventually, of course, the Bulge was closed. And they had Germans running around in American jeeps, American uniforms, and a lot of them had American accents. But when they were asked questions about baseball by our guys, they didn't know, because baseball was not a thing for the Germans. It was, it is today, an American sport. And if you ask them what year did the Dodgers win the series or something like that, they couldn't tell you. And that gave them away. And the prisoners that we took were very nasty, because they knew they were on the way out. There was a situation where the Germans had captured over 100 of our boys, and they put them in these trucks and took them to the rear, not too far, And they stopped these trucks in a very large field and said, "We are stopping here so you boys can have a wee break." And the boys got out. And then the backs of these trucks, they lowered the tailgate and they whipped out the machine guns and they killed them. A few, and I mean maybe 2 or 3, managed to escape. Because there was a brook running by and they got in that and they took off. And then word got to us that this had happened. And that field was full of dead American soldiers, prisoners of war. Needless to say, when we got that word, we were not, and I repeat, we were not very kind to German prisoners of war at all. We made life hell for them. Because a lot of those young men had been in combat since the beaches, and to do that to them, not only is it against all conventions of war, it was just a terrible thing for them to do. Their reasoning was that they had no place to take them and they couldn't feed them. They were on the move, which is stupid. They should have left them where they were. We'd have picked them up. I'm trying to think of that place. Anyway, after that battle was through, we moved back up then into Stolberg and Aachen, and we were there for quite a while. Then the fighting started in earnest right after Christmas, and I do remember I nearly got killed there, and I must put this in there. It was snowing heavily, and we were on the outskirts of, I think it was Aachen, in a big farm place it was. There was a tremendous farmhouse, and we were under attack from the Germans in some force. It was either Trix or the Greek Holland army. Get some ammo, blimey, we need ammo now. So I went to the end of that barn, and the door had been partly blown off, and I went through there, and our half-track was a couple of 100 yards from the barn, and I got up there and I just opened the door to reach in to get ammo boxes, and I got hit with a piece of shrapnel on my knee. And for some reason, it was very small, splintered shrapnel it was. There was a lot of blood. And I thought, oh God, I looked down and I saw all this blood, and of course I was quite scared. But it turned out that I was able to patch it up very, very quickly, and I got the ammo back to the guys. And then I went back and I got some more ammo because we were really under heavy, intense fire. And after that, right near there, we were trying to figure out how big this force was that was coming at us. And then we took a look at it, and we were able to fend them off, and a lot of them were killed, those Germans. We lost quite a few guys ourselves, mostly wounded fellas, and of course they get you then back to the field hospital. So I'd like to go back now to up around Aachen and Stolberg. And then there was a lot of fighting then in different German towns and cities. And finally, when we had gone around Berlin, we didn't go into Berlin, I might add. There were elements of the 3rd Armored Division that were going in there. Of course, the Russians were at the gates of Berlin. And we moved on then up to past Berlin, heavy fighting, tremendous engagement, because this was the last stand of the Germans. We moved up to the Elbe River. Waiting for the Russians to come across. And I think we waited for quite a few hours. And finally, we saw them coming up across the river there with their heavy tanks and loads of infantry. And they came to a standstill. We were there, as I say, at the stand. We'd been there for some hours. And they came across, and they were, of course, all combat dressed. They were black as the ace of spades like we were. We hadn't taken baths in God knows when. Anyway, true to Russian style, they had plenty of booze, and they brought it over. But the thing that surprised me was their tank drivers. They were women, the ones I saw anyway. Big ladies. I'm not talking fat, I'm just talking big ladies. And one of them grabbed me, put her arms around me and hugged me like that. And she was a big lady, about your size. And I said, "Put me down." And she didn't understand. And she was hugging me and kissing my cheeks or what have you. Americano, Americano. I said, "Down ski, down ski." And she finally put me down. And I thought she was going to buckle me in two. But by God, that lady was strong. And she had on one of these Russian helmets. And of course, then this lady said to me, she offered me some booze. And I said, "I don't think so." I said, "That's vodka. I don't like vodka." And she was saying, "Yeah, yeah, yeah," or whatever it was in Russian. So I took that, right? You took in half a glass of booze, right? And she wanted me to down it. I said, "No, ma'am." I said, "Cliffy ain't going for that." I said, "I'll have a sip." And she didn't know what I was talking about anyway. I said, "Small sip." So I took a small sip, right? Then I started to cough, and she started to laugh, you know. So I took another sip, a bigger sip this time, and it burnt like hell going down. So I said to Barney, I said, "You want a drink of this?" He said, "Don't be so bloody soft, that's gasoline," he said. And I said, "Have some?" "No," he said. And I said to Greek, "You want some?" "Yeah," he said, "I'll take it." Well, he had a couple of drinks of that stuff, and it was pure gasoline. It was terrible. Anyway, the Russians have a dance where they get down and they kick their feet out like that, and then they sing their songs, and then the Russian girls, the tank drivers and the guys, they were dancing around like that. And of course there were quite a few generals, Russian generals there. We had some of our own generals that came along. And of course the sad thing about that was my general, General Morris Rose, he got killed. And that was a very sad thing because he was such a wonderful guy. You're talking about a man that from a buck private worked his way up to a two-star general. And he'd always stop and talk to the guys. How's the chow? How's the ammo? Are they all right? Okay, that kind of thing. And he was missed by all of us. That's for doggone sure. Anyway, I felt sorry for, there was a little village, and I do mean little, something like 18, 20 houses outside of Darmstadt. And I went over this village, and I met I met an old man. He said, "Hots, hots," and he was going like this. I said, "What's the problem?" I understood a little bit of German. And he was 75, 80. And he couldn't get medicine. There were no doctors, the war was on, and what have you. So I had a talk with him, and I felt his pulse, which was irregular. He was as white as a sheet. I said, "Old man, come with me." So I got him in the Jeep, and I took him up to a U.S. Army hospital, a field hospital. I was talking to a young lieutenant there. He was from up around Chicago, this fella. Nice guy. And I said, "Listen," I said, "this old man," I said, "dying on his feet. He's had no medicine, no nothing." I said, "Because of the war. Do me a favor, take a look at the guy." "I'm not supposed to," he said. I said, "Go ahead, you know." So he did. He said to me, he said, "Yeah, he's in bad shape." But he said, "I've got some digitalis," I think they called it in those days. And he said, "It's hard to come by," but he said, "I'm going to give him a bottle." And he said, "It's full." And he said, "He's got to take this so many times a day with food." So I explained that to the old man and took him back, and I became a good friend. And that old man hugged me. He was frail, and of course I was, 20? And I took a look at the cupboard. They didn't have refrigerators in those days. No food. I said to myself, right. I got my carbine, and I went to I think they were called the Urban Blowing Forest, if I'm not mistaken. Now, the German deer are a smaller deer than you find in this country or in America and Canada. And I went up there, it must have been about first light one day. I went up there in this forest. I sat on a log and I waited. And sure enough, hands full of deers came up there. First sun, right? So I managed to get 2 of them, and I gutted them out and put them in the back of the Jeep, and I took them to this fella, and he shared them with the village, so they had meat. And I did that on occasion, so they would at least have some meat. And then the old man's wife, she mentioned something about fish. And that gave me an idea. So there was the Moine River there. So I got my Jeep, I went down to the river, and I was talking to an old fella there. He had a boat. And I said, "I want to go fishing." "Fishing?" I said, "Yeah." "Out there." "Oh, good." He said, "No petrol." I said, "Right, I'll fix that up." I went to the Jeep. I got a 5-gallon can of petrol. I had one on each side of the Jeep. I filled up his boat. He got it going, and off we went. And after we got about halfway out, he said, "Where's the rod?" I said, "Don't worry about that." Went out a little further. I said, "Stop." So I got out my hand grenades and I threw 3 of the bloody things in the water. And the doggone fish were just coming up like that. And he had this big net, and he had a tarpaulin and a barrel there. So we filled it all up. And when we got back there, and he helped me with the big barrel and put some on the top, in the back of my Jeep. And I said, some for you. No. I said, yeah, you take some. So I gave him a whole mess of fish. I said, I'll be back. I said, I'll be here 2 days. Tag is the word for day. So I took all this fish then up to this lady, and then the whole village had a feast on fish. And this is true as my kids are living today. And of course they couldn't thank me enough. I wasn't after thanks. I was after trying to feed people that were old. I might have killed some of their sons. So the lady said to me, God bless you. I said, okay. So I enjoyed some of their fish and this venison steak. And 2 days later, by golly, I went down there, and this old fella, he was waiting. I got there early morning, and we got out there, and he pointed to my grenade. He wanted to throw some in there. So I said, I showed him how to do it, you know. I said, 1, right, and he did. Well, I made his day. He threw 2 of those grenades, by golly, and up came the fish again, and we took those fish back. Only this time I left some to take back to his village. And I must have done that for quite a few weeks, taking venison and fish to these people in that village. And I got an opportunity to get close to these people and trying to understand them. I was. And so many of them were not Nazis. They had no use for Nazis, but they couldn't say anything, otherwise they'd be in jail. And I talked to some of the people in the village who understood some English, pidgin English it was, but we could communicate. And I must have been there for quite a while. And of course, being an engineer, I was called upon a number of times for minefields, which was a very tricky job, and in many instances we just blew them up. We didn't try to take them out. We clear the area and that kind of thing. Also, I'm not a bomb disposal expert by any means, but there were times when I was called in to look at a mine, which then I knew who to report to go and do something about it. Also, I was able to become friendly with the people there. This was my main thing, because I did a lot of damage during the war with lives, wounded people and what have you. I wanted in some way to starve myself from all of that.